In the new world, we face disaster. We are looking at hundreds of economic indicators showing us the direction we're headed. And today, I will show you 3 charts that prove we're headed towards crisis. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's get into this article out of Bloomberg, and we're talking about Janet Yellen. This is her quote right here. With policy rates at or approaching zero, central banks of necessity turn to unconventional policy tools such as large-scale asset purchases. I'll come back to that in a moment. Just let me finish off the quote. These unconventional tools have, in my opinion, of course that's not in reality, that's her opinion, served to support a recovery in domestic demand and, as a consequence, global economic growth. All right, let's start at the beginning right here. Policy rates at zero. They've had it here for historically such a long period of time that has distorted the world economy. That's how bad this has gotten. When you have the entire world essentially on the same interest rate. Now, I'm going to go into the euro being on a single currency, single interest rate. But if you think about it, the whole world is now on a single interest rate, and that is zero. So we're having easy money being spread all across the world. Okay, then she says, central banks of necessity turn to unconventional policy tools such as large-scale asset purchases. In my opinion, this is me saying that these are asset purchases. They are not exactly assets because they are in fact garbage, and they are going in at more than a large scale. I mean, they're buying up trillions of the worst possible debt. You're taking the worst possible thing and you're going to put it onto the books of the government and of the central banks. And ultimately what that means is that the individual citizen will be there to pick up the tab. That's what they're not telling you. They're saying they have to save and save and save the economy. They did that with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, because they were such bad ideas from the first place, how they gave out all these loans to everybody who couldn't afford it. They had 5 homes and they couldn't even afford one, just hoping that the prices would improve. And then when everything collapsed downward, the government stepped in and then took that onto their books. This isn't basically they're not calculating for that. So you're talking about trillions upon trillions of dollars or euros or yen or whatever that are not being accounted for. The world cannot withstand the amount of debt that is truly there. So when they say they're buying up these large-scale assets, large-scale asset purchases, they are taking this on and indirectly putting it onto the back of the taxpayer. So forevermore, these taxpayers, the individual citizens, will be paying for the bankers' mistakes. And if I go on quickly, just saying that these unconventional tools have, in her opinion, served to support a recovery in domestic demand. There has been no recovery at all in most economic indicators, and I'll get to those right in a moment, but they're saying domestic demand and global economic growth. There's been no growth. Worldwide, we've seen such a disaster, and there wouldn't be all of these riots and civil unrest in different countries around the world if there was prosperity. People are getting more poor as time goes on, and that's why you see civil unrest. They're directly correlated, and we've seen this throughout history. Anyone who's read even a little bit of history knows that there is a direct correlation between civil unrest and prosperity. As the prosperity declines, civil unrest increases. It's like I said, a direct correlation. Let's go on quickly. Right from the CFR's website, this is an interview that had Alan Greenspan saying some very real truths here, and this is one of the things. He said, with the lower euro interest rates, for example, Italy, I mean, they came down 500 basis points as they moved into the euro. That meant that they could borrow, and did, very heavily. Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Italy borrowed heavily. So you have a single interest rate that they shouldn't be on. You're forcing all of these countries, ones that are very successful and ones that are less than successful, onto a single interest rate, onto a single currency, and you expect everything to go rather well. But we have seen the failure that is the euro for this time, and it just doesn't work. Unfortunately, as much as they want it to work, it's actually getting worse as they intervene more into the markets. And of course, he says basically that they, instead of deleveraging what they did, they just borrowed more because the money was cheap. And that's what we've seen, and it continues on. But as I said earlier, they are now globally at an interest rate that's all the same, and that is 0%. So we see the borrowing taking place. We see it increasing as central banks pump more and more and more money into the basically the bank's hands, and none of it is really getting into the hands of the citizens. In fact, it's worse because of the inflationary measures that are taking place, particularly with food prices and electricity. So this is right here out of the St. Louis Fed. I like to bring you the stats right from the sources, not just show you the charts from some other website. I'm bringing you the stats, and they're always in the description below. Let's look at real median household income in the United States. Declining, and I just chose the year 2000, it's a round number, declining since that time, over a decade. And it goes up and down here, but you're looking at practically a straight line downward, significantly occurring over these past few years. There is no way that you can refute this evidence that people have become more poor in the recent past. This is something that you need to realize how serious this situation is. But of course, they'll never talk about this in the mainstream media. And a lot of the alternative news focuses, I believe, on the wrong things. We need to realize that. Why are we even watching this type of video? Why are we watching the Money GPS? Why do we read the books like this? Because we need to understand what's going to happen to our real wealth. What's going to happen to our children and grandchildren? Well, this is it. We're looking at a decline occurring that is very frightening to me, and I hope it is frightening to you as well. But once we realize that, we then make changes accordingly. And once again, when you have the real median household income, how rich or how poor somebody is at a declining pace, year after year after year, we need to be concerned, and we need to address the fact that the policies that are being engaged, not just by the politicians, but by the central bankers, by the technocrats, by the lobbyists who basically are bribing the politicians, making these rules that are pushing us further and further down, that this is headed further and further downward in the same trajectory. That's where we're headed. And another one, federal debt, total public debt as a percentage of the GDP. Come on, this is ridiculous. You're looking at this over the past few decades, and it is getting worse and worse. Sure, there's ups and downs, but for the most part, we are headed in a much worse scenario, particularly since our last financial crisis. We have seen the debt increase to levels never before seen. Now, that's something to say when you could say that we are hitting the history books. We are breaking records here, but not in a good way, in a very bad way, and they will never get out of this mess. It cannot happen without a complete destruction of the currency system and a setting up of a new one. In my book, I talked about that, saying that meanwhile, the U.S. government is already running a budget deficit that is approaching $1.5 trillion every year, and the number is increasing annually. And again, as I talked about earlier, we're not including the unfunded liabilities. We are not including all of these things that somehow magically don't appear on the balance sheet. They're not on the books. I can't believe this is allowed. If you were using the GAAP-based, globally accepted accounting principles way of doing accounting that all corporations have to do, or else it's illegal, the government somehow is able to get away with that because they say, oh, we don't need to pay that now. It's something in the future. But of course, that's not factored in. When you factor in those numbers, you're talking about many times greater than this, maybe let's say 4 times greater, the numbers vary, than what we're seeing at 1.5 trillion, which, by the way, can't be paid back. There's no way. And of course, it is several times more than that. That's where we're headed. This is not fear-mongering. This is not any of that. I really don't even bother looking into that or getting into that type of information. I mean, come on. They're headed in such a bad and dangerous direction, and they've been headed in this direction for years. We've seen this, and let me show you more of that. The civilian labor force participation rate over the past few decades, we are now, it was increasing there, but now over these this past decade or so, since about the year 2000, we've again seen a decline. We're at a rate that we haven't been at for decades. This is going on globally. Look at the unemployment rates that are existent right now in Europe. Look at the austerity measures. We've seen Belgium under fire. We've seen London under fire, in Italy, Spain. Practically every country has had their major riots that took place. Why? Because they're being strangled. They know that the bankers are all in this to gain more and more wealth, and they're making the people more poor. Why is the middle class being taxed more and more when you have guys like Warren Buffett and you have these big banks getting billion-dollar bailouts, and we see that the money channels directly to the CEO, and he is able to buy luxury homes and yachts, and they have the CEO bonuses and all this stuff, when the middle class is being forced under austerity. And that is what the whole world is waking up to, and unfortunately not quick enough, but we definitely are. Just take a look at the example of the Money GPS YouTube channel. It started only a couple of years ago, and we are seeing now over 8,000. And that's just one individual. I'm only one person and with limited resources and time, and we're able to now reach, closing in on 9,000 now individuals. So if everyone would do this, we would be able to spread our message throughout the world. I get messages for those who are down and pessimistic. I am receiving messages from literally every country in the world saying, look, I'm awake. I realize what you're saying. It's getting serious. I'm seeing it in my country. I'm trying to do what I can. And I really send a message to all those people. You're doing great. Wake up your friends and family. Do what you can. Sure, most of them are going to say, I've had it. I don't want to listen to you. But we need to just share that message however we can. Bring up this message to others very lightly, and just realize that, look, not everyone wants to get into the detail that we do so here, but regardless, it is serious and it's going on globally, no matter where you are in the world. And of course, it will affect us at different rates. The dominoes don't fall evenly, but we need to realize it's serious for all of us. This is where we're headed. This is out of USA Today at $188. Is this America's cheapest house? And right in Flint, Michigan, what they're saying right here is that, this house is actually being sold for $188, and it's definitely a tear down. There was some fire damage apparently, but regardless, the reason I mention this is that we are experiencing a disaster that nobody could ever imagine. The central bankers don't really want to talk about it. They know what's going on. The politicians definitely don't want to get into it, and those lower on the totem pole don't realize what's happening. And we look at the alternative news as well, and I believe that, again, they focus on the wrong information. If your own wealth has declined significantly, whether that's through a hyperinflation or whether that's through a deflation, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if you can't buy your food to eat, you're in trouble. If your neighbors can't buy their food, let's say you had some food, guess whose door they're coming to knock on? And if you don't answer, they might have a stronger response for you. So what I need to just get across to people is that we argue over the little things, the things that, sure, it's great debate. I'm not denying that. But does it matter whether we'll hit a deflation or a hyperinflation, or whether there'll be, any of the scenarios that we've set up here, higher interest rates, lower interest rates, more central bank monetary easing? We know that it's headed for a crisis. We know that our currency is being destroyed. We know that all of these measures that are being implemented are destroying our sovereignty. They're increasing the amount of civil unrest. We're seeing riots taking place. All of these factors will remain regardless of all the little petty things that we discuss all the time. And we need to realize that's what I will do here at the Money GPS consistently, that we are headed for a crisis. What brings us there? We can debate that, but regardless, we're headed for a big disaster, and that's what I worry about. That's why I share this message, and that I hope you have found this informative in all my other videos as well. If you do, it really helps me out a lot to give me a thumbs up. I truly appreciate all that and all the comments. It really helps me boost up higher into the rankings so that more and more people will find the channel. And don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and that is available at themoneygps.com. Scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.